feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Alphanumeric.
We're back on video. Yeah, we haven't posted something on YouTube in a little while because we were at the 2023 Toronto International Film Festival. And when I mean at, we live in Toronto, so it wasn't like we left. But we did only audio only reviews during the festival. So if you've missed us and you're one of our YouTube viewers, please go check out all of our TIFF reviews over on our audio feeds on podcast services over on Untitled Movie Reviews. But enough of that, Eric. We're back on video and we're back to review Gareth Edwards, The Creator. How are you doing?
Matt, I'm tired. You still, even though TIFF this year was a little bit underwhelming compared to past years, you always have that TIFF fatigue a couple of weeks or even month after the festival's over. And so you kind of have that kind of drained quality. But in past years, it's always a good time to recalibrate or recharge because you've seen everything. But this year, it does feel a little bit different where I know you have just talked about it a little bit online and posting that you're going back to school, so you have that as well when it comes to having to flex that muscle memory and kind of keep active and continue to work. So there's that, but then there's also a lot of screenings that we're still going to because some of those movies didn't play at TIFF, so we'll have reviews for films like Saw 10 and Killers of the Flower Moon and all of these films that are going to be big awards contenders and other fall titles. And we have something else coming up that we won't mention quite yet, but we'll probably talk about very soon. So there's a lot going on and you just kind of feel drained by it all. How are you feeling?
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. I felt like I've had my foot on the gas at full throttle and since like mid-August. And that's both professionally, both in my personal life with just weddings and different things like that I've been going to, as well as we had TIFF, I have school, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm definitely with you. And it just doesn't stop. We get another, a huge movie coming out mere a week after TIFF with this movie, The Creator, and something that
They're going to say Saw 10.
Well, and Saw 10, both coming out September 29th, a big day for me because I think I don't know if we put The Creator on our most anticipated films of the year, but
I don't think we did.
But we did put Saw X on there, so
Of course we did.
It's a big day. I ever since I saw this trailer and saw it in that 277 aspect ratio, and Gareth Edwards kind of being free of the shackles of Star Wars or an IP like Godzilla and going back to something like his roots with monsters and able to kind of this creative sci-fi shot with a relatively low budget for the scale of this movie at $80 million and using special effects that he kind of mastered when he worked on that first movie and things like that. So like I was very, very intrigued by this. Like I me, like I love, not post-apocalyptic. It's not even in that genre, but in that realm.
There's
of
a dystopian
like,
quality
dystopian movies I love. So I've been looking forward to this one since the minute I saw that first trailer. So I'm pumped to talk about this one with you.
Yeah, same. I like Gareth Edwards quite a bit as a filmmaker. I think his approach to things is very interesting. He's more of a reserved version of, the studio filmmaker that we think of, where, when you make that small movie that's kind of a calling card film, and then, you level up a little bit more with a bigger film, he's still managed to kind of keep his voice within Godzilla and Rogue One. And there have been reports, obviously specifically with Rogue One, where there were reshoots and Tony Gilroy came in to kind of pump up some of the action and cohesively make it more of a World War II film. But there's an experimental quality and a reserve with Edwards where you feel like, okay, there's he undercuts some of the big kind of sort of melodrama that you would expect from movies like this, and even like the operatic nature of this film. You think like, okay, well, this is going to have a big payoff for, you know, a certain character or an arc or storyline, but it almost plays it flat. And I think that that's what I appreciated most about some of the world building and some of the storytelling when it came to what we expect a movie to do and how a film can play out. I know this is a weird comparison, but it reminded me a little bit in terms of recent releases. And when I mean recent, like the last like 5 or 6 years, is Lynn Ramsey's "You Were Never Really Here" with Joaquin Phoenix, where in that movie the setup of it, or the conceit of it, is a revenge film, but Lynn Ramsey never gives you the satisfaction of simply showing you the violence. You know, it's usually you kind of dwell in the aftermath of it and you never get that catharsis. And there's elements of that here where you're watching certain action set pieces or moments in the film that you think are going to have a payoff that you would expect from, you know, the genre, because you've seen so many movies within, you know, the sci-fi thriller action blockbuster. But Edwards decides to go a little bit in a different direction, or at least restrain himself in a way that I feel is refreshing, weirdly enough. And here I think that's the strongest stuff, on top of the cinematography and the visuals. I watching this movie, you get a little frustrated with, you know, I know you know you're a big proponent of Marvel, Matt, and I get it. Like they're not, you know, it just depends on the film, but the visual effects in a lot of these Marvel movies, whether they're
Yeah.
rushed or not,
Oh,
do
absolutely.
not
Yeah.
look great. Where this film, and obviously, you know, Edwards has a VFX background, look amazing. You know, the way that he
Incredible. Yeah.
integrates and augments, you know, the simulant technology and the AI technology into, you know, droid-esque characters is absolutely incredible. It looks like it was made for $200 million. It's
Yeah.
so beautifully done, and the kind of grain and filmic look of it, and the texture and the chapter divides, all that
Oh,
stuff
baby.
is the aesthetic is amazing. The world
Yeah.
is really well thought out. There's stuff in here that I think this is almost the career that Neil Blomkamp should have had at this point. You know, it's more refined and less obnoxious than a Chappie or Elysium. But there are elements, I think, that are holding me back from loving this movie, and I know you really liked it, so I want you to continue to talk about, like, you know, the performances and the world building and things that kind of really spoke to you.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much nailed it. I think that I'll just flat out say that I think it's one of the best blockbusters of the year and maybe one of the best movies of the year. I think we'll get more into kind of the story and kind of how the movie almost falls apart in the last act and has some maybe some script issues with some clunky dialogue and things like that. But just I want to throw all that out the window because I think you kind of nailed it. Where I think this is visually mind blowing at times. I think it has a pitch perfect aesthetic that was extremely my shit from the moment the movie starts with its title card and its chapter based storytelling, from the look and character design of the AI robots and the simulants and even what the humans are wearing and kind of what the army is doing. It's obviously taking from a lot of sci-fi classics over the 70s, 80s, 90s, you know, war movies, things like that. And even at times with I mentioned the clunky dialogue or the kind of the last act not being great, even feels like a movie that's ripped out of a different time. But I think in a world where you said we're constantly getting, you know, franchises or Marvel movies or superhero movies or um, you know, we're not getting a lot of original films for something to come out, even though it's taking from many things we've seen before. Having a wholly original sci-fi movie that I think is this feels this lived in and this and has this much world building and has this much style and is done at $80 million, it's basically saying, what excuses do you have to everyone else? Like, that's what this movie's kind of saying to me. And yes, it's not perfect. I think, like, I still maybe don't love John David Washington. I think you're in the same camp as me, where he's never clicked with me. And I think that, and some of the dialogue in that last act is what's holding me back from absolutely loving this movie. But I think it's score, while, we were talking with some friends after the movie that, you don't immediately think Hans Zimmer, or it's not super bombastic in your face, but like, I do think that the score works beautifully. I think the performances are mostly all great, minus I don't really love John David Washington. And I just think that, it's action packed. Its action is unique in the sense of it uses a lot of, imagery from, like I mentioned, war films and things like that, but then how it utilizes AI and robots and stuff to depict some of that, I think is really cool. And some of it, the simulants and the robots look like humans, but then some of the designs of like a barrel droid that's just used a kamikaze, like it was so cool and interesting to me, of like how you would create these AI robots that, you would utilize in war. And then the overall story, I think, is interesting. I think the plot is where it struggles sometimes. I think the story and the heart of it, if you look, it does mostly work. And I think, that classic kind of like AIs becoming sentient and having feelings and treating them like another race, or being, and like with equal rights and things like that, I think is an interesting concept that's been tackled time and time again. And I think the movie plays with that in an interesting way. I think its central, um, like, love story, doesn't quite work by the end of it, but overall, I think it's a fucking awesome movie, and I think it's great. And the more I think about it, the more I like it. The more I think about the stuff I don't like, the more I don't like that stuff. So it's kind of, it's something's holding me back from really loving this movie, but a lot of it I fucking love. So I don't know where you want to jump from there, but like, I think that the John David Washington thing, not to focus on something too negatives, your dogs agree with me. Um, I just, I don't know what it is. And, at times he reminds me of his dad, almost too much at times. And at other times there's just a lack of like something, and I can't even like put my finger on it. But when I see him in Tenet, and when I see him in this, and when I see him trying to like carry a film, when he pops up in Amsterdam, I mean, and he's a lead in Amsterdam, really. He's not like, I mean, it's an ensemble, but like in Malcolm and Marie, and like, I think he's great in Black Klansman, but like, it, there's something that like I'm watching and going, man, if this is someone else, I think I'd like this movie even more. And I can't even like articulate why I don't think John David Washington's great, but there's something about his line readings and his like delivery on stuff that just hasn't really clicked with me. But we can start there, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm not as big of a fan of the storytelling
Yeah.
overall and the emotional arc, because I think that is key in counterbalancing the spectacle of it and the visuals of the film, and it doesn't match the world that Edwards has created. It's co-scripted by Chris Weitz, who directed the Twilight Saga, New Moon, and About a Boy, and movies like that. And actually, Chris Weitz is a very nice guy. He's actually kind of a little bit like a Gary Whitta, where he's always popped on why am I forgetting the Flophouse podcast, where
Okay.
he talked about New Moon and some other movies, and he seems like a very affable guy. But and it might not be all him. It might be Edwards as well, because they work together on Rogue One in the script department. So, but there's something about that relationship between John David Washington, who plays Joshua, this kind of brooding military or former military guy who's or special forces operative, who's kind of being brought back into the fold, and it kind of becomes a little bit like Apocalypse Now,
Yeah.
um in sort of him finding the Deus ex machina of the story, Alfie, who's played by Madeline Yuna Voice. And I think that if you don't buy into that sort of relationship in terms of how it evolves over the course of, being on the run from the military and, going their own way and trying to, bridge the gap between man and machine and live in a world in harmony, it's going to be harder for you to buy into some of that third act, especially, but even just the through line of, a man that is still grieving the loss of his partner and still wants to find some sort of closure or catharsis within that. And I never bought into that. And yeah,
Yeah.
John David Washington is very stilted and kind of feels self-aware as a performer. And when you're watching him in something like Black Klansman, all of that isn't there. It's such a relaxed and
Yeah.
affable and completely in the moment present performance. And I get why people like Gareth Edwards and Christopher Nolan and David O. Russell and all these other directors would want to work with him afterwards, and the studio would want to make him, a name, actor, not just simply because he's the son of Denzel, but because that movie is showing you all this amazing potential. But it doesn't translate here. There's only one moment that I kind of felt that coming out a little bit, where the movie star that maybe we needed in this film came out,
Mhm.
and that's when they're deciding on what Alfie's name is going to be. And they mentioned, she's like, I like Candy, and it's like, you're not going to be named Candy because there's a whole
Yeah.
designation in
In
Vegas, and
Vegas,
and
yeah.
and that felt like a moment where it was
Some
breaking.
personality, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And so when you're watching scenes like, the flip of the switch where he becomes the protector and the surrogate father to this character and trying to keep her from, harm's reach, I never bought it. And I also
Yeah, I
thought a lot
agree.
about Denzel because of Man on Fire
I was
being
gonna
a
say
very
Man on Fire, yeah.
similar situation with Washington and Dakota Fanning. And I think that movie does it in a more um earnest. It's earnest, but it hooks you, and
Yeah.
it gets,
Well,
and you actually feel that flip of the switch, where this hardened kind of tough guy who's dealing with a lot of things and kind of internalizing it all is finally starting to have a breakthrough.
yeah.
And
I
yeah,
mean,
so I
that trope has been done so many times now with the, like, older man, younger girl kind of thing having to be her protector, and it's been done so well recently with things like The Last of Us and Logan and stuff. You brought up Man on Fire, that was a little while ago, but I'm sure we could name a bunch of other things too, where when you're using that trope and you don't do it well because it's done so well recently, I don't know. I think it stands out a little bit more, and I think John David Washington's a part of that because I think he's so stilted at times. I think that's where you lose some of the emotional core to the movie with his relationship with Alfie or his relationship with Maya, Gemma Chan's character too, and so I think that's where the movie doesn't work. But then, like we mentioned, where it does work, I think it soars with its, like, I think its visual look and everything we mentioned before. Like, I love the use of the 277 super wide cinematography. Like, I heard an interview with Gareth Edwards where he talked about that they shot the movie basically, it was like two 185 frames side to side because of the lens that they used. So it ended up being like 3.5 to 1 that they shot in. But he wanted to release it that way, but the studio Disney wouldn't let him. So they were like, you can't release a movie because it'll be like too thin on the screen. Like most modern screens are 185 screens, right? So it would be too thin. Um, and he convinced them to release it in 277 because Tarantino did with Hateful Eight recently. So I'm glad that they let him kind of play around with that. I love the look. I love the super wide look. Um, we saw it in IMAX. I'd say that definitely helps because the thinner frame, so you have more screen real estate. So I'd say if you can see it in something like IMAX,
it's free real
do.
estate.
Yeah, and then also, I'm not usually someone who suggests this format, but I do think that this is an interesting case study. Is Gareth Edwards did say that they gave the extra footage that they cut for the 277 frame to Screen X. So Screen X does actually, I think, have the full frame that they shot, like the 3.5:1 frame. Um, and usually when you see Screen X, they might have a little bit of extra footage based on how they shot it with what lens. But they sometimes add these really awful looking like CG side things just to try to engross you even more, and it always looks pretty bad. So I am curious to maybe go see this in Screen X if I have the energy. I say this now and I probably won't, but there's only a couple of them in our area. But I just wanted to kind of flag that because I do really love the wide cinematography. And Eric, I'm a sucker for chapter based storytelling. And the one criticism I have there is that it kind of ends halfway or 2/3 through. And I feel like they could have added another chapter title, and that's me being nitpicky. But I do feel like when it gets to, I don't want to say the chapter names just in case they're spoilers, but like when it gets to that last chapter is a long chapter. And I feel like they could have, it feels like the chapter titles go away 3/4 of the way through, or 2/3 of the way through. So I feel like just being consistent with that style. But I love like the little logos, and it's stuff he did in Godzilla as well with the
Yeah.
with the English, and I don't want to get the whether it was Japanese or
Well, it's new. So
like New Asia.
New
It might have
Asia
been like
is, yeah.
it might have been a new script or something like that. So I don't want to say the wrong thing, but I just loved this visual style of the movie is crazy. And we mentioned, I'll let you jump in a sec, but um like the designs of the simulants, and I love the different types of the simulants versus like the pure robots versus they have like specialty robots and stuff like that too. So I thought all of that was awesome.
Yeah, and I'm glad that they went with the title The Creator, because if there was a title card that said True Love
That was a
in the
bad name.
movie,
That's a
that was a
bad name.
bad
That's a
name.
good call by Disney or whoever was like, we can't title the movie that.
Yeah, and going back to the cinematography aspect, there is two cinematographers, who worked on this. You have Greg Fraser, who had to leave halfway through the production, or there was overlap with his Dune duty, like jury duty, but Dune duty. So he kind of had to pass the reins over to Oren Soffer, who is the co-credited cinematographer here, and the consistency is strong. Like, it never feels like the voice is disjointed in terms of the visual storytelling, where like you're watching the movie, it feels like one singular vision. And it's obviously coming from Edwards, but it, with Fraser and Soffer, it feels like the collaboration process between those two those two cinematographers, those two filmmakers, they understood the ebbs and flows, and how to keep that consistency of just like the visual style. I think the strongest aspect of the storytelling is the opening sort of prologue that's kind of distilled into a newsreel, and I think Edwards is very good at creating that docudrama feel that we even saw in that faux documentary quality of Monsters, where
Yeah.
you see the newsreel telling you about this nuclear bomb going off in Los Angeles, and that is being sort of like the main sort of focus of why there's conflict between AI and humankind, because humankind believes that the AI did it, and AI want to continue to live, and humankind is threatened by the next step in evolution taking over, and seeing the quote unquote writing on the wall about that kind of stuff. And I think that works the best because it's a little bit more kind of unobtrusive in its storytelling, and how it's kind of removed, and you're watching just events play out in a way that feels somewhat real, or somewhat believable. Like when you have the one military guy talking about what they're doing after the bombing and things like that, and the creation of New Asia, and sort of the AI becoming this new terrorist organization in a way, and
Yeah.
the rest of the world sort of banding together and creating. And this is a little bit on the nose in terms of social commentary, but having Nomad, which is kind of like the eye in the sky drone kind
Yeah.
of thing that's always watching the activities of potential threats. And so that kind of plays an interesting part. But then, you have this love story that's told through flashbacks mostly, that's very Terrence Malick like, in a Thin Red Line kind of way, where Joshua is always thinking about his relationship with Maya, and that also is very corny and a little bit it kind of feels like it slows the story down, or kind of cuts away from the in the moment sort of on the run kind of action of the storyline. And going back to that reel again, I think that reel is probably the most um sentient in terms of it being a reference to things like Blade Runner, because there's even
Yeah.
a line that's used in Blade Runner, the motto of more human than human. And in that reel you see sort of the advertising of specific robots as being more human than human. And Children of Men is another one that's come up quite a bit in terms of that kind of that bond between somebody trying to do
Yeah.
something for the greater good of humanity, but also still has to kind of keep their wits about them when it comes to sort of facing off against other people. I liked that Allison Janney was kind of cast as an anti-hero villain with sympathetic qualities that still also was very prejudiced against the simulants. But there's also something about her performance that feels very stiff, and it's
Oh
like,
yeah.
okay, I'm trying to be like, I'm trying to talk like this, and I'm gonna do this, and we're gonna do this, and it's cold and calculated and matter of fact. But then her talking to Joshua, and Colonel Howell, her character, and her talking about her backstory, you're kind of waiting for like the personal aspect to get in the way of the job.
Yeah.
But there is something interesting with the technology that they use in one scene that's very frightening, that I thought was really well done, and also very much reminded me of like something you might have seen in District 9.
Oh, that was awesome, dude. I
Yes,
know
yeah,
exactly what you're talking about.
which
And
I
it's,
think is very
it's
disturbing.
and it's set up in a interesting way for, I think that was done very cleverly, like too, where it's set up, and the payoff I think is, while it doesn't always work like we mentioned, but that setup and that reveal of what they're doing, I think is really disturbing and
Yeah,
really one of the coolest sci-fi concepts. I remember sitting there going like, "Oh, that's fucking cool." Like that concept has been around for a while, of people hypothesizing that that would be something, and we're beating around the bush, everyone, but like you'll see when you see the movie and you'll probably know what we're talking about. But there's one sequence where it's something we've talked about in real life that could be a potential future, but seeing it in use in this movie and how it's being used, I think is disturbing and very cool, like a really, really cool sci-fi concept.
yeah.
But I agree with you with Allison Janney. She reminded me a little bit of what's his name from Cameron's Avatar. Fucking, why am I
Oh,
forgetting?
Stephen Lang.
Stephen Lang, but like not
But
Stephen
she's not.
Lang.
She's not as over the top.
Yes,
She's
yeah,
not a
but
Papa Dragon in this one.
yes, exactly. She's not as kind of corny and like in that kind of classic,
James
yeah,
Cameron kind of
yeah,
cliched military,
yeah. But she
but
has elements of that. It
yeah.
reminded me of too, and obviously Cameron's taking from a lot of sci-fi movies too for Avatar. But and
Well,
he's
even this
obviously
is
well
borrowing a little bit
from.
from James Cameron,
Oh,
just in
totally.
terms of some of the designs. They feel very, grounded, or somewhat realistic, and not just
Yeah,
like you know um copying necessarily other movies in the last decade or so, even though there are those influences that it wears on its sleeve, and it understands that. But it plays it pretty well when it comes to the production design, the world building, the VFX. There's a lot of great stuff there. I just wasn't as big of a fan of the central narrative or
yeah.
the story, and I felt that that was just overwrought, and emotionally I was just disconnected from it.
And I don't disagree with you. I just felt like the aesthetic and the visuals and the action and everything else surrounding it overpowered that, to the point where I felt like the central story was serviceable enough that it made me enjoy all those elements like thoroughly, to like the 10th degree. So like I totally understand where you're coming from, but I'd like to see it again and see maybe if I appreciate that central story a little bit more. Or I might have the opposite effect and I go, no, I'll double down on that. It doesn't quite work. But I like the movie enough that I'm fighting with myself, but I'm going I'm
Mother,
going I'm
father, you wrestle inside me.
I'm going 4.5. I gotta do it. I
Wow.
just like the other stuff. I was thinking today because I was looking at some other things I gave fours to, and I was like, it could be in that camp. But then I think of the 10-point scale, and I go, is it an 8 out of 10 movie? I'm like, I think it's better than an 8 out of 10. So I go, okay, is it an 8.5? And I go, I think it's probably closer to an 8.5 than an 8, but I have no way of displaying that, and I'd go closer to a 4.5 than I would a 4 when it comes to trying to get to an 8.5. That's very convoluted in the way I explain that, but
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 that's your
it's like,
process.
to me, a 9 out of 10 movie almost, even though with a big asterisk that says like, I
Can
wanted
you
the
do that
story
again?
to I wanted the story to be for audio listeners, I was like writing out what an
Oh,
asterisk
it
would
kind of
be.
looked like you were doing
Um
this.
yeah, yeah.
It's like
Eric's
at a
giving us
rave.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Fist bumping. Or fist pumping, not bumping. um Anyways, I'm gonna go 4.5. I think it could be a 4 on any day. It could be a 4.5, but it's not quite a 5. Like it's not. I think it will maybe withstand the test of time, and I think that's because of things like shooting on location, using creative methods of visual effects, and like I think it will hold up, and I think this will be considered one of the better original sci-fi movies of the last little while. Um, I just think it kind of struggles on the story side of things.
Yeah, I'm there with you on the visual effects and the scale and scope of it, and you just mentioned it and we didn't talk much about it in terms of the cinematography there, is that like Andor, it's
Yeah.
being shot on location as much as it possibly can. And so that opens up the style
There's a
even
great
more.
quote from Gareth Edwards, and I'll let you continue.
No, no, please do it now
It
because
it
I would like to
was
hear it.
it was I gotta find it again. Is like
Okay, as you go,
oh
I'll
yeah,
keep
I got
talking.
it. No, our whole plan was just to go to some of the greatest locations in the world because the cost of a flight is way less than the cost of building a set. And I was like, that's perfect.
That's great.
Like it's just like go shoot the film on location and use otherworldly backdrops and places, interesting locations, and then enhance it with visual effects. Do not create everything with visual effects or the volume or something like that. Like it just doesn't look real. It doesn't. And I'm starting to get frustrated. And this is a guy who fucking loves the Marvel movies and loves other things. But you see things like Andor and Rogue One being one of the visually better Star Wars movies, I think, too, for the same reason. And then this movie now shooting on $4,000 cameras, on location and costing a fraction of the price of some of these things. Like, thank God Disney made this movie with this guy because I hope they'll go to every other person and go, why the fuck can we get this? Like the story we can work on that doesn't cost that much more money. With writer strikes over, we'll work on that. But like all this other shit, like please, I hope no stories come out that the VFX people were overworked or something on this movie because I think like you got to look at this and go, this was made for $80 million on real locations using very clever and interesting looking CG. And it just fucking rules. Anyways, continue. Sorry.
And I think Edwards again having that background is important because you do have a lot of filmmakers that when they're working with VFX, they're not just simply using it as a tool in their kit. They're using it as almost like a way to be dependent on the post production process if they don't get something when they're shooting, where Edwards, I think, because he has a bit of an advantage there and knowing how to use things, and even when he's shooting he's probably taking into account
What he
what
needs to have done. Yeah.
you can implement into a scene in post production or what you don't need, because sometimes we always talk about this with when it comes to score, and this is the same thing with visuals, is less can be, sometimes be more. You don't need to cloud a scene with all that digital noise or all that kind of graded effects that don't stand out or do stand out in a bad way. And I think some of the best visual effects are the ones you don't see or the ones you don't notice, that are just kind of seamless. And there's so much there to appreciate. And again, I really like Gareth Edwards a lot, and I think he's a talented filmmaker. Of his movies that he's done within the studio system, Godzilla, I think, is still my favorite of his stuff, because it just felt like a really unique take within that world. And even now, where where that franchise has gone, it still is such a unique and individual film. With this, I that script, that story, the emotional beats, it really tears it down so much that I felt this way a little bit after Rogue One. But the first time I saw Rogue One, I was very much like how you were feeling now, where I felt like, oh, this is, a one and done Star Wars movie that's kind of deconstructing, what it means to be a Star Wars film,
Yeah.
and being almost weirdly existential in its narrative storytelling. Um, but over the years, while I still really appreciate everything he was doing with that movie and what Tony Gilroy was doing with the film as well, it's kind of that enthusiasm has kind of waned a little bit. So with
Interesting.
with this, I just kind of felt like, 4.5, 5 for the visual effects, the cinematography, the design of the world building, but the story is just so run of the mill that it's like I have to give it
Just
3 out of 5. And
give
it
it to
hurts
me.
me
Yeah.
because it's there's so much to like. There is so much to like. And you know what? I really do respect the film a lot, and I think to see it in
You're
IMAX
not
is the
mad. You're
best.
just disappointed.
I'm just disappointed, but I'm disappointed in a way where there's like, it's like, oh, this is really good, but then you get like to a spot that's undercooked or something like that, and you're
Yeah,
like,
and
oh man.
undercooked's a perfect way of describing it. Hey, the writer strike's over now. I know we can't get another shot at this one, but and I hope they don't turn it into a franchise or anything, for the love
No,
of
this is a
God.
one and done
For the
movie. I
love of
want him
God, just leave it
just
be.
and also just let Edwards make his movies, because that's another thing I'm also worried about. You mentioned, like, you hear how the visual effects people are treated. I'm also nervous to hear, like, in like a year or two from now, or even less time, that Gareth Edwards, his film was taken away from him and someone else came in and did reshoots, because
I
that
think
was the
on
thing with
this,
Rogue
I
One
think
and
this they were a
Godzilla.
little, and I think what the perfect full circle moment, Eric, because I kicked it off with that, where it's just like Godzilla and Star Wars being, very famous IPs. I think studios being a little bit more protective of those two things. I guess Godzilla to a lesser extent, but it was a bummer when you heard that rumors of Godzilla being, taken away from him, rumors of which were proven that Rogue One was kind of taken away from him, and you could see that with who's running Andor. Um, and
Both
with
guys
it,
like to shoot on location, though.
which I think they worked well together. It just ultimately, it's fine. It ended up working out, and I think letting him do something original, I'm sure Disney and Fox were just like, you're making this movie for $80 million, not
That's
200.
chump change.
So yeah, like, you can do whatever the fuck you want. We're not going to take it away from you. Yeah, obviously it seemed like he still didn't have final cut or anything like that, or else he would have released it in 3.5 to 1. And then everyone would have gone to the theater and went like, what the fuck is so thin? um, and that's the problem with things not being properly projected, right? So like, I understand that as well. But I hope that this was his full vision of the movie, and I hope moving forward maybe he plays around with it in original sci-fi instead of he's dipped his toe in Star Wars, he's dipped into his toe in Godzilla. Like, let him do some original stuff moving
Let him
forward.
create his own original movies, please, because
Original movies, who would have thought?
yes.
In this day and age, in the year 2023, an original film, an original big budget sci-fi movie. Thank God it wasn't titled True Love. All right, that's a 4.5 out of 5 for Matt and a 3 out of 5 for Eric. I think both of us still suggest that you go see it. Go see it in IMAX. Give Screen X a shot. Maybe it's the only time I'm ever going to say that aloud.
And
So
support an original studio
yeah,
movie.
and that's what I hope. I hope this does well, so we get more of these, right? Even if you don't think it's perfect, if you think it struggled from the story department, like it really, like, not that you need to Disney needs your money or anything like that, but to show that we're interested in big original sci-fi movies like this, I think is always a good
And
thing.
creatives
So
like Gareth Edwards.
yeah, yeah, and Chris Weitz. Um, I mean, shout out to him for
Academy
producing.
Award nominee, so
Right, yeah, for
About a Boy.
About a Boy. Yeah, I forgot about that. Um,
Oh, a
and
quick shout out also to Ralph Ineson,
one of
who
the
plays
best
the
voices in
military
Hollywood,
guy. The
man.
Green Knight himself is in this film, and anytime he pops up in a movie, yeah, that voice is just pure gold.
Just absolutely magnificent. Thank you all for listening or watching. We're back. We really do appreciate it. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, please go check out all of our TIFF reviews. We have a bunch of them. They're over on the Untitled Movie Reviews podcast channel, so they are audio only as of right now. Maybe I'll compile them all together or throw them up on YouTube at one point, just so they're up there. Who knows? I'm very busy, but they are there on audio. So if you're watching this and you just they're pretty quick. They're 15-20 minutes long. Eric and I reviewing movies from the Toronto International Film Festival. So go check those out. One stop shop everywhere is I was gonna say oh God, what a Letterboxd. I don't even know where my brain went there for a second. At
Matt,
Untitled
are you shutting
underscore
off?
movies. I am not off. Stand by. Uh,
God.
it's not. There are some clunky moments in the script. I'm not even going to deny
And that's
that.
a very
But I
James
still,
Cam. That's a very James Cameron
yeah,
line too.
yeah. I
Why do
still
you
enjoy
cry?
the show. And follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
You can find more of my reviews and interviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene. There's a current episode on right now where Matt Rohrbeck and Shaquille Lambert talk about the Saw franchise.
What is happening?
Oh my god!
Why did that happen?
That was perfectly timed.
What happened?
The
I don't even know
AI
what
are
happened.
taking over. Oh man, and it's a
How did I
really
even do that?
that's incredible. That's a perfect touch. Oh, there it is again. Yeah.
Oh my God.
So yeah, on that note, it's a really wonderful interview, and I thank you, Matt, for being on that show, because I know you were getting ready for school and things like that, and um, yeah, and we also have an interview coming up with Chelsea McMullen and Sean O'Neill, the director and producer of Swan Song, a movie that we reviewed during TIFF that we both really liked, and I hope that if you have a chance to listen to it, check it out. And if you are in the Toronto area, it's playing at the former TIFF Bell Lightbox, now just TIFF Lightbox, I guess, in a film version. But there will also be a 4-part docu-series on CBC coming, I believe, in November. And then you can also find me on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
Gareth Edwards, you ruined ice cream forever.
Can I make it do it again?
You just, yeah!
Bye, everybody.
What is happening?